All right, hopefully you guys are already familiar with most of this. You spent a lot of time looking at this summer. What we need to do today is we need to make sure we can identify the articles and amendments. We're going to need to be able to use this to explain the interactions with the branches of government. First, we're going to take a minute and talk about the preamble. I learn every year that some of you guys were forced to memorize this in 8th grade or something like that. It's really not important that we learn specifically what the preamble says, but I do want to look at a couple parts of this here. It says, "We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice," on and on and on. The important thing about each of these things is they're pretty vague. What they're doing here is they're telling us the goals of the government. And when the goals of the government are something like promote the general welfare, that could mean almost anything. Take the situation right now with the coronavirus. If promote the general welfare is a goal of the government, then that possibly justifies the government forcing a company like a distillery to start making hand sanitizer. It could force a company to start working on a coronavirus vaccine. It could also justify the government sending you checks to go out and prevent economic collapse. So these are all very vague concepts. And the other thing that's really important here is that the Constitution starts with the phrase, "we the people." The Articles of Confederation was an agreement between 13 states. But the Constitution here is an agreement between the people of the United States. This gives us an idea of popular sovereignty, right? This document exists because we, the people, decided that we wanted a government to do these things. So everybody that's in the government is they're either elected or they're indirectly chosen by the people, and the government is set up to serve the people. This is not a document that is an agreement between the states, but this is about the citizens of the United States. So the 7 articles of the Constitution make up what we call the original Constitution. You might see this in questions. They'll ask you about the original Constitution. They might call it the 1787 Constitution. They might call it the Constitution as ratified. But what that means is we're only talking about what's in these 7 articles and not what's included in the amendments. So as you know, Article 1 sets up the legislative branch. That's our Congress. We just want to know some basics about what's in this article here. So it sets up a bicameral Congress, meaning we have 2 houses, a House and a Senate. It gives us those specific requirements for who can serve in Congress, and it tells us how we're going to choose them. Then it devotes a big chunk here to the expressed powers of Congress, which powers are written in the Constitution. Now, if you're actually looking at the Constitution on paper, Article 1 is very long. Okay, here's what's important about it. It was first, so we know that they think that it's an important thing to deal with, and it is longer than any of the other articles. So we know from the Constitution that the framers intended for Congress to be the predominant branch of government. Article 2 is not nearly as long and not nearly as specific, but this is about our executive branch. So this basically creates the office of the president, the vice president, and hints at parts of the federal bureaucracy here. So again, not a lot here. We just want to know the basics. It sets up that there is a president who's the head of the executive branch and that there's a vice president. It sets the specific requirements for who can serve as president. It tells us how we're going to choose the president by explaining the electoral college system, and it gives the president a few expressed powers. Article 3 sets up the courts. And this is a really short article. If you're looking at this on paper, this is like, a couple paragraphs long. They clearly have the least thoughts about what it is the judicial branch should do. So all this does is this establishes the Supreme Court, and it tells us that judges are going to serve while on good behavior, which creates this idea that judges serve for life. It doesn't say anything about any other court other than the Supreme Court. It just says that Congress will decide what other courts exist. So any federal court is entirely under the control of Congress in terms of creating it or changing its jurisdiction and things like that. It also specifically defines the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, what cases would go specifically to the Supreme Court. For example, if Tennessee sued Arkansas, that goes directly to the Supreme Court. And then it has our only instance of a crime and punishment listed in the Constitution, and that's where it explains the process for convicting and punishing a person for treason. Oftentimes people will talk about the Constitution like it's our set of laws, but that's not what it is at all. It's a plan of government, and this instance of treason is kind of the only place in the Constitution where it gives us a specific definition of a violation of law and its punishment. So together, Articles 1, 2, and 3 have already set up the whole national government, right? Each one has set up a different branch of government. So we have our legislative branch, our executive branch, and our judicial branch on the national level. What's left in Article 4, this is our relationships between states. And so all Article 4 deals with is what are those things that the states are going to need the national government to help coordinate or possibly enforce. So there's things in there like, we'll go over this a lot later, but things like what happens about agreements between states when states share something like infrastructure. Downtown, we have this bridge that is shared between Tennessee and Arkansas. How will the national government facilitate that cooperation between states? We have what to do with official documents between states. I've got a driver's license. You've probably got a driver's license. It came from the state of Tennessee, but you can drive in any state with it because all the other states have agreed that if Tennessee thinks you're good and you're qualified enough to operate a car, then Mississippi can agree with that. It also goes through the process of what to do when we want to add new states and things like that. So we'll go into more detail when we get to Chapter 3 about federalism here. Article 5, we're definitely going to spend a lot more time talking about later, but this is a document created in 1787. It's a plan of government that's never been tried before. And so Article 5 has this important addition that the Articles of Confederation didn't have. This tells us how to make amendments to the Constitution. So we can add things to the Constitution that will change how the government operates. And the important thing here to keep in mind is that in order to add an amendment, you have to have big majorities of both the national government and the states. This is important. This reflects the ideas of federalism because it is impossible for the national government to make a change to itself without the agreement of a big majority of states. So this is going to be the kind of thing that prevents us from like easily getting rid of the Electoral College or easily putting term limits on congressmen or things like that. We have to have a big majority of states agree to any change in the Constitution. Article 6 is really important to deal with how the Constitution functions. We call this the Supremacy Clause. It tells us that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The Constitution is above all other things, over any office, over any law passed, over any treaty agreed to. The Constitution supersedes all of those. It gives us the basic ideas of rule of law, things like that, like, the president must follow the laws just like any other citizen in the United States. And it gives us the basis for the fact that national laws supersede state laws. So if the United States passes a law that says one thing and Tennessee passes a law that conflicts with that, the only law that matters is the national law. Finally, here in Article 7, this is just the process for ratifying the Constitution. We needed 3/4 of the states to ratify the Constitution, and at the time that meant 9 states were necessary to put the Constitution into effect and then replace the Articles of Confederation. So that's what's in the Articles. That's the original Constitution. We're going to spend a lot more time on each of those articles over the next week or so, and let's quickly run through what it is that are in these 27 amendments.